Let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we are unpacking a massive controversy surrounding former Qantas CEO Alan Joyce and his brand new memoir. We're going to examine the highly publicized claims he makes in this book and stack them right up against the stark realities of the corporate and legal battles that are literally still playing out as we speak. It's a fascinating clash between one man's personal narrative and a giant corporation that is just desperately trying to turn the page. Now, the big question you're probably asking yourself right up front is simply this. Why on earth is Alan Joyce suddenly back in every single headline this week? I mean, think about it. Here is a retired, exceptionally wealthy CEO who stepped down in late 2023, handing the reins over to Vanessa Hudson. The original plan was a quiet retirement. He had the money to never work again, and the logical next step was just to sail off into the sunset and enjoy life. Yet instead of doing that, he is suddenly at the absolute center of a media firestorm. And this is where it gets kind of paradoxical, right? Because Joyce himself has stated, quote, "I want to fly under the radar." But his actions are telling a completely different story. You don't exactly fly under the radar by dropping a 300-page tell-all book titled Riding the Jet Stream and launching a massive media tour. He is actively reigniting every single fight he thought he had left behind, from the pandemic lockdowns to massive class action lawsuits. To really get why there's so much backlash right now, we have to rewind a bit and look at his highly polarizing 15-year run at Australia's flag carrier. It's really a tale of two legacies. To the shareholders, well, he was the turnaround king who stepped in and saved the airline from near collapse. But to the unions and the staff, especially during that brutal 2020 COVID-19 crisis, he was viewed as a cost-cutting bulldozer. He stepped down in late 2023, and now with the release of this memoir, he's actively trying to cement his own version of that 15-year history. All right, let's dive right into part one, inside the memoir and its three key confessions. Joyce frames things super carefully here. First off, he finally acknowledges that Qantas got some of their pandemic decisions wrong, specifically regarding that standoff over unpaid leave and mass outsourcing. But, crucially, he completely stops short of actually apologizing to individual workers. Second, he fiercely defends that deeply unpopular decision to hold on to $2 billion, yes, billion with a B, in travel credits. Critics called it completely tone-deaf, but he argues it was an absolutely necessary cash buffer for the airline's survival. And third, he states he has absolutely no regrets about his aggressive leadership style. Which leads us perfectly to this absolute standout quote from the book. He says, "I was there to make tough calls, not to be liked." Honestly, that right there is the core of his entire defense. From his perspective, you simply cannot run a massive international airline by consensus, especially not during a once-in-a-century global crisis. He views his aggressive, sometimes abrasive style as a completely necessary tool for the job. But as you'll see in a minute, that very philosophy is now being weaponized against him by his former colleagues. Which brings us to part two, the boardroom backlash. Now, it's pretty much unprecedented to see a sitting chairman publicly blast their own former CEO. But Qantas's current chairman, John Mullen, actually broke rank. He publicly pleaded with Joyce to just leave the past behind and stop stirring up old wounds. Mullen is desperately asking for peace so the airline can finally rebuild trust. And Joyce's response? He staunchly defended himself, basically saying Mullen is entitled to his view, but that he, Joyce, is entitled to tell his story. So yeah, there is absolutely no truce happening here. And look, the board isn't just mildly annoyed about all this. They are terrified. They're right in the middle of this really fragile customer-first brand rebuild, you know? They are so worried that every single time Joyce gives an interview on this book tour, he is just reminding the public of all those past grievances, the mass cancellations, the lost bags, the fired workers. They fear his version of history is going to actively undermine their rebuild and reopen some severe reputational and legal damage. Let's shift gears to part three. The multi-million-dollar reality. Because Joyce's narrative is colliding head-on with some absolutely staggering numbers. Let's start with $105 million. That is the massive class action settlement Qantas just agreed to over ghost flights. If you don't remember, that was a practice where the airline just kept selling tickets for flights they had already internally canceled. Now, while this isn't Joyce's personal financial liability, it's a massive, massive crisis that occurred squarely on his watch, and it really complicates this whole narrative of him having a triumphant tenure. But incredibly, that actually pales in comparison to an even larger lingering liability. We are talking $160 million. This is the staggering outstanding compensation bill that came from a high court ruling, which found that Qantas illegally outsourced 1,700 ground staff back in 2020. And that money, it hasn't even been fully paid out yet. To put that into perspective, it's a massive, lingering financial and human resources disaster that is quite literally still hanging over the airline today. As you can probably guess, this financial reality is fueling sheer fury from the workers. One union representative put it as bluntly as possible, saying he should be apologizing, not publishing. The anger stems from the fact that Joyce is out there effectively doing a victory lap with this book tour, while 1,700 illegally sacked workers are still checking the mail for their compensation checks. And honestly, to add insult to injury, Joyce dedicated a mere 2 paragraphs to this entire massive legal saga in his 300-page book, just vaguely citing ongoing legal processes. Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, Legacy versus Reality. Because right now, Joyce's words and his actions are just completely at odds. He's claiming he's financially set, he's just looking for some quiet non-executive board roles, and he really just wants to disappear. But then, he goes out and executes a highly visible 4-city international book tour across Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and London, complete with over 20 interviews. Industry analysts are calling this exactly what it is: legacy management. It's a highly calculated PR campaign to reshape how history is going to remember him before the ink permanently dries on his turbulent tenure. So, distilling this whole explainer down for you, here are the 3 big things you absolutely need to take away from all this. Number 1. Joyce is out there explaining his philosophy, that the ends justify the means, but he is definitely not apologizing. Number 2. Qantas leadership desperately wants him gone, both literally and metaphorically, so they can finally fix their battered image. And number 3, this story is far, far from over. Between the class action appeals, the worker payouts, and the shareholder lawsuits, this is going to drag on in courtrooms and boardrooms for years to come. So, Alan Joyce claims he wants to fly under the radar, right? Well, he has flown straight back into some severe turbulence instead. His book, Riding the Jet Stream, is out right now. But when you step back and look at the mounting legal bills, the furious workers, and a boardroom literally begging him for silence, the real question is anyone actually buying his version of the story? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the narrative, and we'll catch you next time.